Hi, this is Lisa, and I have invented a crochet technique called the Breakaway Crochet Method, which enables us to make a series of very small crochet motifs continuously joined as you go. So you can see this project here. I have a whole series of very small motifs that I've done one right after the other, and there are absolutely no breaks in between, so I did not cut the yarn between each motif. I've done this as if it was one continuous piece of crochet. Okay, I have a publication that's available on Ravelry, which goes through a lot of this technique in my, more in-depth explanation of how I go about my projects. So this is, if you really want to know the ins and outs of the method, this is available. I call it the Breakaway Training Wheels Project, which is available on Ravelry, and I'll put the link for that in the links below. Okay, so let's get started with the very basic thing. First thing you need to know to make projects using the Breakaway Crochet Method. I'll move that aside. And it all starts with the technique of making what I call a floating ring. Now, a floating ring is something I do instead of the normal chain 4 slip stitch to the first chain to make a ring, which would make the center of a motif. So instead of doing that for the center, I'm doing something that I call a floating ring. Okay, so to make a floating ring, I've got my slip knot started on here already for the first one. The first thing is yarn over hook, and now I want to grab hold of the yarn underneath the hook, and I want to have a little bit of slack here. Okay, and then yarn over again, and I want to grab hold of that yarn as well. And see, so I basically have these 2 loops here with a fair amount of slack underneath the hook. Okay, so we're almost done. The last step to finish off the floating ring is to draw through those 2 loops, and here you have those 2 strands of yarn are what I'm calling a floating ring. And again, instead of doing chain 4 for a center of the motif, I'm doing that. Let me run that through one more time. Whenever the instruction says make a floating ring, you do a yarn over and grab hold, another yarn over hook and pinch that as well. Draw through those 2 loops. And that there is your floating ring. Let me just separate that a little bit for you. Okay, that's your floating ring. Okay, so since my project here that I'd like to show you is made up of double crochets, there's something we have to do, just one more little step we have to do to set up the beginning of each motif. Okay, so all that involves is just an extra yarn over before we make the floating ring. Okay, so I've done a yarn over, and now make the floating ring again by doing the yarn over, pinch, yarn over, pinch, draw through those 2 loops, so that's the floating ring made. Now notice I've got 3 loops on my hook here, which means that my double crochet is already set up. The first stitch of the round is ready to go. So yarn over, draw through 2, draw through 2. Alright, so I've made the center ring of the motif and the first stitch of the round all in one hit. Okay, I think I'll do that one more time now that you've seen what's going on. Oh, and also that I'm calling that a floating double crochet. So to make a floating double crochet, there's just the first yarn over. Now we have the first yarn over of the floating ring. You pinch, yarn over, pinch, draw through 2, which makes the floating ring, draw through 2, draw through 2, which makes the double crochet. So this whole unit here, this whole stitch is a floating double crochet. Now to finish off the motif, it's business as usual. Yarn over and through the center ring. Oops, and we're just going to make some more double crochets in this ring. I've only made the first 8 of the very first motif of this project because of the unique technique, we are not going to work complete motifs in one hit. We're going to work only partial motifs and then jump to the next ones to facilitate the continuous way this project will be worked. So all you really need to know is for the first one, you've made the floating double crochet and you've done 7 more double crochets in that ring. Now it's time to move on to the next one in the series. So what we've just done the first half, but here's a joining point here. So it's time to work the beginning of the next motif until the next joining point. Okay, so we're working like in a manner like that. So to jump to or break away to the next motif, we just make another floating double crochet. Yarn over, pinch, yarn over, pinch, draw through 2, draw through 2, draw through 2. So there's the first stitch and the center ring of the next motif. And again, we just make 7 more double crochets in this center ring. Okay, so that's what we have so far. We started the first 2 motifs, one right after the other, no breaks in the yarn, just gone straight over to the next one. All right, and I'll do just one more just to help it all sink in. All right, we've reached the joining point to make our next one in the series. So yarn over, pinch, yarn over, pinch, go through 2, go through 2, go through 2, and now 7 more double crochets into the floating ring. Okay, so now we've started 3 motifs, and I think that'll be enough for this demonstration. So you can kind of see we've worked almost like as if we were working a row. And now it's time to finish these first 3 motifs off. So we do this by working back the other way, which all that means is this motif here, we've got 8 double crochets. We just need to do 8 more to finish it off. So as you can see, finishing off this motif at the end automatically gets us going back the other way down our row, so to speak. Okay, and one more thing we need to do to finish off this motif. As it is now, there's a gap. Normally you would put a slip stitch in the first stitch on the motif, but in this case I prefer to do a slip stitch between the two. It just, to me, it just looks neater that way. Just makes it more symmetrical looking, in my opinion. So let me do that one more time. To finish off, I just take the hook between, bring that through and through the loop. So that's made a slip stitch between the two motifs. Sometimes I call that slip stitch around in pattern instructions. Okay, so we finished that one. Now let's finish this one off. Just make 8 more double crochets into this motif. And you can get them all in there. Squeeze them all in. Okay, so that's 8. And again, we slip stitch between the two motifs. And that's that middle, that's the middle one finished now. Now, the first one is going to be a little bit different because I want to actually make another row of these just above. So instead of doing the 8 double crochets, I only want to do 4. 1, oops. Okay, so by only doing 4, that means I've only gone a quarter of the way around this motif. So because the next motif is going to be up here, just above. So that's the next joining point. All right, so this is something unique to the very first motif of the round, or row, I mean. Okay, so to start the next row, here we go again. We make another floating double crochet. Yarn around, pinch, yarn around, pinch, draw through 2, draw through 2, draw through 2. And for this one here, the first one of this row, I only need 4 double crochets this time, because that's where the next joining point will be. Okay, let me just lay this out. I've got to stop there because the next motif is going to be just right next door here, and that's where the joining point is. So let's start a new one. It's a floating ring, double crochet, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, I'm only doing 4 because I've got a joining point now. I've got to join this one into the row beneath. Okay, so to do that, I count back 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to slip stitch into this here. Now you can do this any way you like, but I have a way of doing a slip stitch that I really like because it sort of looks as if there's no interruption in the flow of the work. So my way of doing a slip stitch is I'll go into that stitch and then I kind of pull everything, the work to the left, even the yarn, everything is to the left of the hook. And now I do the slip stitch, which gives that little chain stitch. It's all going in the same direction as the work, so it just looks a little bit neater to me. Okay, I'll do that one more time. Kind of head the hook downwards and bring it to the right of the motif I'm working on in the yarn. I go underneath and grab the yarn and pull through. Okay, so that's joined this motif to that one. And now let's do 4 more double crochets. Which brings us to the next joining point. Okay, so now we're ready to do the very last one of this sort of setup row, we might want to call it. Okay, so let's start it off. Yarn around, pinch, yarn around, pinch. Go through 2, go through 2, go through 2. And again, we're only working 4 double crochets. It's kind of a quarter of the way around the motif. Find the joining point here, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. And we head the hook down this way. And slip stitch. And we do 4 more. Okay, so that's sort of our setup row for our second row of motifs. And again, we continue working. We do the rest of this motif by working 8 more double crochets, slip stitch in between, 8 more double crochets, slip stitch in between, and then 4 at the end. So I'll just quickly do that before we go on to the next process. Okay, so here we are. That's the second row of motifs complete. Now notice that these motifs on the edge, we leave those unfinished. We can't finish those off because the joining point is here. We've got to stop here to make our next row. So this is okay. We're going to leave all these unfinished until the very end. Okay, when we come to this point on the last row, and we just work 8 here, slip stitch in here, and then work 4 more. Okay, so really, that's the basic process or the order of things that enable this crochet method to work. I might just show you another way of explaining this here. I've done this sort of mini project, and I've used different colors of yarn. So in this case, I did have to break the yarn just because I wanted to change color, but normally this would not be how I go about things. Okay, so to make things a little bit more clear, here was the starting point. I made a floating ring, and I did 8 double crochets. I made another floating ring and did 8 double crochets, another floating ring and 8 double crochets. That was the foundation row or setup row for that first row of motifs. Okay, for the return row, I just continued on around with 8 more double crochets with a slip stitch in between, 8 double crochets, the slip stitch in between, and just 4 double crochets at the end here, because that's the joining point. It tells us it's time to move up to this one. All right, so again, just 4 here, and worked 8, but oh sorry, worked 4 and then join that in with the slip stitch, then 4 more, 4 here, slip stitch, 4 here, and then this is just like we did on the first row. We did 8, slip stitch, 8 stitches, slip stitch, and then 4. Now up here I've just done one more row, which is exactly what we've just done here. Okay, and remember how I said we leave these, the first ones, unfinished until the end. Well, since this was the last row here, I keep going and do the last 8 of this motif. I slip stitched in between there, so it might help, you know, the work was turned this way as I was working. I did 8 more here, I did a slip stitch, and then the very last 4 of that very first motif, and that was the end. And I've left these yarn tails just to show that any, you know, if I had just used one skein of yarn, those are the only 2 tails I would have had to, woven in for my project. Now, instead of having, 9 or however many yarn tails, I only have these 2. Okay, so that's hopefully made some things a bit clearer about my technique, the breakaway technique. I do have plans to make further videos and lots more patterns that I have available on Ravelry. I'll put links to that up there as well. And stay tuned for the next or future video where I will show you that it is possible to make motifs that are more than one round. So hopefully I won't be too long before I can get that one organized. So happy crocheting and stay tuned for future videos. Bye.